Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Mac and Bolt here again. Today we're discussing, I think, one of the greatest generals, in my opinion, one of the greatest generals to have ever lived. But not he's known as one of the last great Roman generals. So, and of course, we're talking about Flavius Belisarius, the Eastern Roman, I mean Eastern European, because that's where he was born, but Eastern Roman Byzantine general during the 500s. Very great man. He reconquered the empire with like 8,000 guys. He went and retook back all the empire and for a really just reason, I think. And the reason we're talking about him and why I think he's significantly different than all these other generals, the greats like Julius Caesar, Augustus, even both the Bulgar Slayer, some of the ones that come after him. The reason we're talking about him is how he did it exactly. It's amazing, really. This guy invented hearts and minds. So that's something that when the Iraq War was going on, you would hear that nomenclature a lot: hearts and minds, hearts and minds. Well, this guy kind of started it. I'm sure there's people before, but this is the first instance that I know of that is like this, where you have a general that doesn't loot and pillage. At one point, he takes over Carthage, like the jewel of the jewel of that part of the Mediterranean. We used to be Carthage, the big empire of the Peloponnesians and the sea peoples that came over, and he took that city and did not loot when he landed. He never looted and pillaged. He always got them on their side, and by extension, that made it very easy to. And it's like reconquer. Well, he didn't conquer. All of these people willingly came back to the empire because they consider themselves Romans. And you had 437 is when Rome fell. The Western Empire, Rome fell. The Ostrogoths took over Italy, and then you had the Vandals who went the whole way around Spain and down into North Africa and finally settled there and took over all of that area, which took it away from the Eastern Roman Empire. So they had always seen themselves as Romans, obviously, but they were reconquering. So it's not. So this is very different. I feel like he doesn't get talked about a lot. He's not like one of the greats, when really this dude went above and beyond and did everything that the other guys couldn't even dream of doing. Conquering a whole place with just 8,000 men. It's kind of crazy. So we're gonna get into him, Flavius Belisarius, great man. How we're gonna do it is we're gonna cover his early life, how he got to where he was a commander, then his different campaigns. He had one over against the Persians, and then he had the Vandals, and then ultimately the Ostrogoths retaking Rome and holding it for several years. But that's what we're going to talk about today, guys. So I hope you come with me. I hope you enjoy. Hopefully, the audio is a little bit better. I kind of figured out a different configuration, so I'm hoping the audio is better this time. But yeah, come along with me, guys. Let's go. All right, so when we're talking about Belisarius, we're talking about the last great Roman general, arguably for the Byzantines, the Eastern Romans. He was born in or around 500 AD. We're in ad dominium. Jesus has already died, but that's where we're at. So he was born in the Balkans, 505 AD. Gets a really good upstart, promotion above peers, as they would say in the army. You could just see that this guy was going places and he went fast. Kind of got up to become the general or the emperor's bodyguard, Justin the First. So we have Justin and Justinian, which is kind of confusing a little bit. But Justin adopted Justinian. I think he changed his name then once he becomes emperor in 527. But before that, Belisarius is Justin's bodyguard in 527. Up well before that. And then in 527, he dies, and Justinian, his adopted son, which we'll throw up pictures. He's the guy that, like, if you see things about the Eastern Roman Empire, you see his mosaic and his wife's mosaic. That's him, Justinian. Uh, Great man, I guess, within his own right, but we're not here to talk about him. We're here to talk about the GOAT, Belisarius. But in 527, he gets promoted to the key commander of the Persian front. They kind of had different fronts, obviously, so then they would, each side would have different leaders. So in 527, Justinian becomes emperor and he makes Belisarius the key commander of the Eastern Front, the Persian front. That's like in the Middle East. The Persians, who are today the Iranians, you know, very sad with what's going on there. But we're going to get into that next. All right. So I personally have summed this up as in the Persian Wars. They were not called the Persian Wars. They were all very like little conflicts and everything. And obviously they were fight the Byzantines and the Persians were fighting for thousands of years under different sultanates and I forget what they call them today, caliphates. So but at this time, we're in 527, 528, we have, like I said, Belisarius becomes the commander of the Eastern campaign, and he takes command around the East, and they attack, and they have the Battle of Tharius, which this is like a total kind of defeat. And this is kind of where he gets away. Obviously he doesn't die, but all of his troops die and they retreat and he kind of learns that like, hey, we don't have a good setup. How the army is set up, it's not really set up for mobile warfare. So you at this time you had the Huns who came across and they have their like lightning warfare. They fire from bow and but on the horse with bow and arrow, they have the recurve bow, which was like way ahead of its time and compared to the other bows, the Byzantines at this time they don't have the horse archers or anything. They have like the cavalry and the infantry, and they're not hybrid, like they're not put together, and they get wiped the fuck out. And this really teaches Belisarius too that he really needs to change his tactics and really figure out if when he's outnumbered, because he's always good. He's literally always. That's why he's so great too. This man is always outnumbered, and it's almost interesting because some of the things in this that you're just getting it from that's what they say, but some of these things that we're going to talk about, it's like, really, is this really how this happened? But hey, I mean, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. That's what the history books say. That's what we're choosing to believe. So that's what we're going with. But so in 528, they get all wiped out by the Persian horse archers, and have more numbers, better equipped infantry, better, and they outmaneuver Belisarius's troops. It's a total defeat disaster. But they all regroup. That brings us to the Battle of Daro. The Battle of Daro, I think it's called. And this was another instance where he was outnumbered, but this time he had taken, and he was a smart man. That's what goes to show people that, you're not going to win them all, but when you lose, you have to take something out of it. And he sure as fuck took something out of it. So it brings us to the Battle of Daro. It's 25,000 versus 50,000, which, so he's like outnumbered 2-1. So, and we're not exactly sure why. They don't say why he doesn't just defend like the siege and do a siege. He goes out and sets his men up for them to come and then do a pitched battle on the field instead of doing a siege. So, but he has like a trench system. So the best way to kind of explain it is the trench goes like one, then it goes like that, and then like that, like a U kind of. So, and then he has troops on one side of the U, the other side of the U, and then two little things of horse archers on the inside, and then he has troops behind the trench, obviously. So that's kind of the setup. And then the Persians had their cavalry on, and this is kind of like that's like the setup that all armies did: cavalry on the wings, troops, infantry in the middle, and then archers behind them. So that's kind of the setup they had for this. And it's like, well, why didn't they all attack? But this is supposedly how the battle goes. So, but so the right side attacks first. Oh, I guess, and we should say each side has their not so good troops and their elite cavalry troops. Belisarius has his, which we're going to talk about why these troops were different, and he goes to show that properly trained and equipped men, you don't have to have the number to win. You just have to have the right number of properly equipped and properly trained men, and that's what Belisarius had in this instance. So the Persians had it was like 30,000 infantry, um, 10,000 cavalry and like 5,000 archers. Belisarius had something similar to that, but cut it in half. So I think he had like it was like 1,000 horse archers split into two 500s on each right. And they were like, if you go like this, the U of the trench, the horse archers were on the inside of the trench right here. Then he also had the cavalry, the Foederati, more men of means, I guess. They had Foederati, they were conscripted from the Anatolian heartland and the Balkans from within the empire. The horse archers were Hun mercenaries. And then you had his infantry, which were his infantry from the state. Those are the troops given to him. But then he also had his own personal bodyguard unit. It's the Bucalari, the biscuit eaters, as they were called. Now, these guys were different because they were properly, personally trained, equipped by Belisarius himself. So, and they also had to take an oath of loyalty to Belisarius. So he had like 1,000 to 1,500 of these guys that were trained, had the had the best equipment. They had lances, but they also had recurve bows with horse archers. He makes the Bucalari after his first defeat in 527. In 527, he does not, or 528, he does not have the Bucalari. After this, he does some thinking and blah 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 blah. Comes up with the Bucalari, and these guys are the ones that take it home for him. And it's like we talked about the Janissary. It's like, look, man, look how things can. I hit my mic. Sorry, but look how things can be used for good or evil. But he had the Bucalari, the biscuit eaters. Those were the held in reserve. So that's his side. He had the infantry behind the U, cavalry on the flanks, but he had the horse archers also 500 on the inside of the U. And then on the other side, the Persians, didn't have a U. They were charging and attacking. Obviously, Belisarius was defending and they were attacking. So they called theirs the Immortals. Their elite cavalry were called the Immortals, but those weren't personally raised by the general and loyal to the general. Those were just the elite troops of the Persians called the Immortals. But they also had their cavalries on the flanks. So the way that this starts and the way it goes is the right side attacks first. The right side cavalry attacks first, and it attacks Belisarius's right side, obviously, which are the Foederati, and they are attacking. So, and then at this point, there's a sneak attack of like 500 mercenary horsemen that are behind, off to the left, wherever. But they come from behind and they attack the back of the cavalry of the Persians, and then also the horse archers, the 500 horse archers that were on the inside of the U. And it's like, I guess they go around and then they attack also from the back. So then they get sandwiched and kind of fucked. Then that's like a rout then. So then you have the left side coming down and attacking, and the Immortals were attacking their left side. And it kind of goes to show he had it. Belisarius before this, from his first defeat, really drilled his troops, and this is where it goes to show. So the right side gets attacked, and those Federati get attacked, and they get routed and start heading back to the walls to the city. Belisarius sees this. He recalls the right side, who are chasing off, and killing everybody, because that's when everybody would really die. You would have battles and stuff. Not a lot of people would die during the battle. It's like during the rout. That's when everybody would get massacred. But he recalled 500 of the Huns back from them that were running, and then they come back with the 500 on this side, and then he also sends his Bucalari in to shore up that left side. So that's kind of taken care of. And then once the infantry once the cavalry gets kind of taken out and everything, then the infantry just gets swiped and wiped everybody out. And it was a massacre for the Persian. Not a good time for them. They get massacred. They get rolled up, taken out. Oh, there was one thing that was the single combat aspect of this too. Before the Battle of Dara started, a Persian guy was like, "I will fight anybody," blah. and a wrestler named Andreas comes forward and kills him, and then kills another guy that was like, oh shit, because they lost a lot of face. This was in front of both armies that they were doing the single combat to like be like, oh, my side's better. It, shows whose side God was on, really. But Andreas is the W. He takes a double W, two W's. That's a double W. But yeah. So we had that the Battle of Darrow, great victory and everything, and it shores it up for a couple years. There was no like fight because it's like after that battle happened because they would launch raids. So Persia would like launch raids into the Eastern Roman Empire's lands, which raids are you go there, steal everything, burn it all down to kind of weaken the overall position of the empire. So they came in to try to do that. They were stopped. So that kind of shores it up for a couple years until 531, where the King Khosrow, I think it is, no, it's the one before Khosrow. He launches an attack, and they just start taking everything. Because it's not like they had a force that would guard the border, but all they really could do was like send messages back. They weren't going to stop a whole army, obviously. So really their job was to send message back. But every town had a garrison, not like everybody just chilled together. Kind of, I mean, it's like it is today. We don't have just millions of troops chilling in one place 24/7. It takes time to gather them up. So you have this in 531 where the king launches raids over into the Eastern Roman Empire. They sack, raid, steal, plunder, and then on their way back, they're it takes some time to gather up the forces. So Belisarius gathers up as many men as he can. Not as many. I think it was like 35,000 to 15 to 20,000. 35 Persians, 20 Byzantines, and they are on their way out. They're actually leaving, and Belisarius is kind of hesitant. He's like, "Oh, let's just let them leave. They're kind of already on their way out." But he gets pressured against his better judgment into fighting this next battle, 531, which is the Battle of Clinicum. Major defeat. And I think this is kind of that next sobering moment that Belisarius has that, like, what I say goes, and I'm not gonna be second guessed by anybody under me. Yes, I have advisors. Yes, I will take their advice into like I will consider everybody's advice. But as far as the final plan, if I feel like it's something that I don't want to do, we're not doing it. But that's not what he did. He did the Battle of Clunicum, and it's not really his fault either, as you know. So in this battle, he's kind of sets up. He doesn't have the ditch, but he sets up to go attack, kind of the same way, infantry on the flanks. But as soon as the enemy infantry comes in to fight, his right side, the Hassanites, I think they were called, but they just flee, and then he gets rolled up. So it's not really. That's not even real. I mean, well, I wasn't there, I guess, but I'm shilling for him, so I'm choosing to believe it wasn't his fault. So it wasn't. It was somebody else's fault. Those motherfuckers that ran away. That's who we blame in this instance, not Belisarius. But no, I'm just kidding. But that's what happens in Kalinicum. They come down, they roll up, master defeat. Such a defeat that well, and it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Obviously, he could have died from this, but he didn't. And they fought very well. It was like they like got pushed to the river. There was a river that they had to like fight around, and then they let the rest of the army retreat, and then those got. But it wasn't like a complete destruction. Flee and terror and everybody gets wiped out. It was an orderly route retreat that they all had, fighting retreat, and they inflicted enough casualties that they had to leave a lot of the slaves and loot behind because they couldn't then carry it all. So it wasn't like the worst thing in the world, but obviously Belisarius is recalled from his commands in the east. No, I don't know if it's over this or whatever, but there's a peace treaty There's a peace treaty that is then signed because of this. The Treaty of Eternal Peace, it's called, in 531, I think 532 or something like that. So the king pays Justinian pays 11,000 pieces of gold to Khosrow for this piece, recover these things in chronological order as they happen, because I think that's the best way to cover something. But I forgot. Ah, Flavius Belisarius was married to Antonina. Put a picture of her up. She was like Empress Theodora's like maid or whatever. I don't know. She was like an agent for her, really, and women. But no. But Antonina is Belisarius's. I can't say faithful because there's some talk about it not her not being faithful at all and fucking everybody pretty much. Very sad. Just shows like what being a good man. No, we're not doing saying that. But Antonina is his wife. That doesn't have to do with anything. It'll come up later, but that's his wife. But he gets recalled, so he is in the capital when the Nika riots break out. Nika riots. These happened in 532. 531, you have the Eternal Peace, or in 532 AD, Belisarius gets recalled, and we have the Nika riots. We're going to take and talk about these specifically because everything that you learn about this and everything, these things just get glazed over, and it's like, well, what even were they? So I feel it's important to talk about these things. So we're going to go into the Nika riots. So, what were the Nika riots? So, in 532 AD, the Nika riots broke out. What were they? So back then, a lot of people know Rome as the gladiatorial state and the gladiatorial combat and everything like this. But that weren't the only games they had. They also had like bread and circuses. They also had circuses, and they also had chariot racing, which became huge. And actually, at this time in 532 AD, gladiatorial combat had been banned for over 100 years. So chariot racing was the big thing. And at first, with chariot racing, you had four teams. You had the red, blue, green, and white. But eventually, those just get turned into the blue and green. The red and white get absorbed into the other two teams. The blue is the nobility, and it's like that you could separate these by classes, really. So the blue team was the upper nobility class, and the greens were the working men. And it's like the patricians and the plebeians, kinda, in a way, really. But so in 532 you had these riots, which came about when it's like, so after they would have riots normally and things after these matches would go on, people would get all riled up, which it happens today. It even happens today. So there's a parallel you can draw. Whenever there's times whenever a team wins a hockey match or something, and they go and fucking burn the whole city down. So things like that would happen back then just as much. But at one of these riots, things had gotten particularly bad. A lot of things got burned down, and like swaths of people got murdered. So Justinian arrested these people. It's like obviously in trying to restore order, he arrested them and then went to have them hanged. So, but on the day of the hanging, as they were hanging him, the scaffold broke, and two of the men that were supposed to be hung, and one man was from the blue team and one man was from the green team, they were saved and taken to a church and like tried to like be healed and everything, but they were rearrested. And what started the riots were that both teams, because Justinian would then go and watch the races, and he voted for the blue team. But those teams demanded that there was a full pardon for those two guys that lived, and Justinian refused. He did commute their sentence to life in prison, which is not especially back then. But he didn't pardon them, and that's what kicked it all off. So when he refused to like unconditionally pardon these guys, both teams came together, and it was like 100,000 people. 100,000 people is the max that could have been held in the Hippodrome. So it's probably up to 100,000 people started rioting, and for 5 days they burned down roughly half the city. And it got to a point where Justinian actually like was barricaded in the palace, and he almost like left and fled. And there Hypatius, there was a guy, the previous emperors or an emperor before them's nephew they were gonna bring in against his will. This guy was named Hypatius, and the rioters wanted Justinian to advocate and bring in Hypatius and make him emperor against his will. He didn't even want this. But during this time, they were like, "Oh, maybe we should leave." And then Empress Theodora, which she's a girl boss in her own right, we got to give it to her, give it up. But she said, a noble shroud, a purple makes a noble shroud," meaning that I'm gonna die with my colors on, because purple. The only way to get purple dye was by breaking these like clamshells, and it was like really hard to get that purple dye, that fabric. So it was really expensive. So obviously saying that purple makes a noble shroud, you get a shroud when you die. And and Justinian was like, "You're right." So, and it's funny, and then like people glaze over this. What they did was they had some talks. They barred the gates. Well, first they went to the blue team, which they're the nobility and everything. They had people like in there that they could talk to. They bribed the nobility to stop rioting, and they did. And then as the and they were all in the Colosseum. Then as the blues left, they fucking barred the gates on the Greens and slaughtered them all. As that's like, what are we doing here, guys? But that's how it happened. They bribed, and I literally have never heard, whenever all of this is discussed, and nobody talks about that. Like, okay. So that's like half of them got bribed to go home, and then the other half was completely slaughtered. 30,000 people sealed the gates, and Belisarius was the one who commanded that that be done. Which shows his loyalty. W's for loyalty, but maybe slaughtering. And I mean, it's the people were rioting. They killed the people. It's kind of like I understand where Justinian was coming from for this. Like, so you don't want to say any massacre is justified, but let's just say I understand where he's coming from. You weren't gonna leave, and he had Hypatius killed. Poor Hypatius, dude didn't want to be emperor. But like for good measure, and I think this started to make Justinian paranoid, and as we'll talk about, as Belisarius does these very great things, takes these swaths of lands back without a fight, Justinian gets jealous. And there's people like John in Cappadocia, who is a lieutenant of Belisarius, who's constantly whispering in the ear that he wants to be that Belisarius wants to overthrow Justinian. And if you're somebody like that, fuck you. Don't do that. Don't. Don't. But no. Um, so that happened. That kind of cemented Belisarius's loyalty. It should have. In my mind, it would have, but whatever. But that kind of cemented his loyalty and brings us on to the Vandalic campaign. All right. So now that this has gone on, and this cemented he wasn't going anywhere as the emperor. So now he kind of like then legacy. That's like the next thing, as any great emperor would do. They had his costly peace in the east with the Persians, so that only leads one place to go, and that's west. And there's a lot to this too, reconquering, reunifying the empire. There's a lot of noble pursuits behind this. Like it's not just going and conquering for conquering's sake. No, we're reconquering and bringing our people back into the fold. And like I said, he doesn't slaughter them or anything. He even buys supplies from the locals when he's there. So different than any other general before his time or anywhere near his time. So, like, that's why I think it's like we have to talk about this guy because he was doing hearts and minds 1,500 years ago. Nobody was doing that. Takes one of the biggest cities in the world and doesn't burn it or raze it to the ground or loot it. Goes there and he acts like a king, not literally, but he does some king shit as we shall say. But so we are in 532, 533. Like in 533, 532 AD, we're talking about Belisarius, great guy, born in the Balkans, went out to the east, had some muff ups there, but they got the peace that they needed. Now He's undertaking his Vandalic campaign, which only takes 6 months. This is some shit, bro. This is like, 8,000 troops. Alright. But before we get into that, I want to take a second, and I think we've touched on it a lot. I don't think we're. So as we were talking about that, I wanted to take a quick stop and talk about why Belisarius, why I'm covering him, and why is he different. Well, first, I'm covering him because I can. This is my YouTube channel and I want to. But I'm also covering him because he's very different. He doesn't get a lot of love. Whenever anybody asks who's your favorite Roman emperor or general, and that's kind of the thing too, is a lot of the generals then became emperors, and I don't know if that makes him great or not great, but he chose loyalty, and to me personally, that's something that's you don't see that. We love that. Love to see the loyalty. We love being loyal. Loyalty is so important, it's unreal. But I think it's like one of the you have to choose who to be loyal to, because in this one, as you see, he didn't really choose the greatest guy to be loyal to, and if maybe he should have taken, because he could have taken the crown. Who's Justinian? He was a fucking nobody. You have fucking Belisarius, man. He fucking did it all. He could have had it all, but he chose not to. Two different times he could have had it. He could have made his own his own he could have made his own kingdom in Africa, and he could have made it in Italy. And both times he handed the crown to Justinian. Very loyal. He took all of this with 8 to 16,000 troops, and he was facing armies like a quarter or 4 times his size, up to 100,000 troops at times. And just his style of warfare, his way to lead, that he inspired other men, that they none of them would ever flee, except when he had his battle over in the eastern province in Syria and shit like that. They left him there, but these men, after he undertakes his Vandalic campaign, it's just so admirable. Pays for all his grain. There's two anecdotes. There's one where, as soon as they land in Africa, some of his men steal apples from an apple orchard, and those men are punished, and they are paid. The people are paid, and he gives a speech about how we are not conquerors, we are liberators, we are protectors, we are here to liberate our people. We are not here to steal from them and destroy them. And that wins over so many people so quickly that a lot of the places don't even put up a fight. They're like, oh yeah, check. Nice. Then the other anecdote that we're going to talk about is whenever they were leaving to go to Africa, two of the Huns drunkenly murdered one of their compatriots, one of their fellows, and Belisarius has them hanged, and he gives a speech about he will call no man his comrade that has unclean hands, which unclean blood on his hands, which is like blood on your hands, you're killing everybody. Unclean blood on his hands, meaning the blood of somebody innocent or somebody that you weren't supposed to unjustly kill. Very different from the times. So such a different time. It's almost like modern doctrine. Like that's he was doing this 500, 1,500 years ago. So, and then also his psychological warfare, as we'll talk about. There's a couple different instances where he uses psychological warfare to psych out the enemy, and it works in his favor. So it's very this guy was like thousands of years ahead of his time, but so great guy, awesome, and we are gonna cover the Vandalic campaign, the Vandalic Wars. All right, so I did get the year a little wrong. We're in 534. So, yeah, 532 is when the peace happened, 533 is when the Nika riots happened, and 534 is when the Vandalic campaign happened. 600 ships, 15,000 men. So I was sorry when I said 8,000. He had double that. He had 15,000 to 15 to 18,000 men. These were made up of infantry, archers, Fodorati, and Esbukalari. So they had the infantry, they had the archers, they had the regular cavalry, and then the bucellari, which are the elite cavalry that he pays himself, who takes an oath of loyalty to him. They have like 1 to 2,000 of them, and then the others are respectively split accordingly to be a modern, or not modern, to be an army of the time. He comes, obviously he leaves from Constantinople and he comes down. I think he lands in Sicily. He finds out that Galamar, who overthrew the previous king, has sent most of the ships and everybody to deal with a rebellion in Corsica. So Belisarius, great timing, is like, oh, God really is on our side. So he was gonna do a landing like further out and then work his way into Carthage, because Carthage is the capital of the Vandalic kingdom. But he decides, since most of their navy's gone up to deal with that rebellion in Corsica, he just goes and lands, and he lands right outside of Carthage. I'll show put a map up. He lands like right outside of it, like 100 miles or whatever. And they land, and like I said, you had the thing where they were seen as like liberators, but as soon as he landed, some troops tried to steal some apples. They got punished. He as soon as he started sending letters out to all the magistrates, letting them know that they are there only to fight the Vandals, and not even the Vandals, just the ones that are overthrowing the previous king, because the previous king was pro-Roman, but Gelamar didn't like that, and he overthrew them. So it's kind of like perfect opportunity. But he comes down, he sends those letters out, and then he starts to march. But Galamar sees them, sees the small army, and he has like twice the amount of people, so he wants to set up an ambush. So that's his Galamar's big plan, is to set an ambush up um for Belisarius as they're coming around the coast. They're marching up towards Carthage. There's like a spot that's like perfect that you couldn't see the other ones like and then yeah, perfect spot for an ambush. So they go set out to do that. But God, like I said, God, I believe I. This is when I'm choosing to say you can believe it or not, but I choose to believe that God was on Belisarius' side for these campaigns, for because he did it for all the right reasons. So God being on his side, Belisarius arrives, and he arrives early enough that Galamar's brother, whatever his name is, I didn't write it down. But Gelamar had a brother who was a commander, and they're like marching, and Belisarius gets to Gelamar's brother first and kills him, and routs them, sending his army back. And like they were all marching to the ambush. So as the ones that are fleeing run into more and more groups, each one are seeing it, and they're turning around and fleeing. So as they're doing that, Gallimar is coming from the other side. I think he's coming from the east, and he doesn't see that happening. And as he comes onto the field, he like fights off the little bit that were sitting and guarding that area where the first ambush had happened. And Gallimar sees his brother, and at this point, so they well, at this point, you had Gallimar there, but the Belisarius' troops were chasing the other half of the army back to Carthage. So Belisarius was actually split in a really bad spot. All of his cavalry was gone fighting these people, and then he had like his infantry and stuff back here sitting. And Gallimar kind of came up at the right moment that he could have went and took out the cavalry and then went and took out Belisarius. He really could have won any which way. All he had to do was act, but he didn't. As Gallimar comes onto the scene, he sees his brother Adahad, I think, or something like that his name was, and he breaks down crying, can't believe it, and completely paralyzes all the troops, has his brother buried and a funeral service for him, and that gives Belisarius the time to regroup everybody and kind of put everybody in formation, and then they attack and wipe out the other half of the army, kind of sealing the fates. And this was like at like 100 miles outside of Carthage that had happened. And after this, and this is where we'll talk about Belisarius he waits for one whole day after that before he moves in and starts marching on Carthage. And he's welcomed into Carthage as a liberator. They throw open the gates. There's not even a siege or anything like that. And that's it goes to show the hearts and minds. It's like, okay, you can say that you're here for us, but if all your people are pillaging and destroying everything, then you're not with us. But you paid for supplies. You're really liberating our people. I think that he throws coins out to them as they're like parading through the city. So these people, they want to be back in the Roman Empire. At one point, they were all Romans, besides the ones that weren't. But they obviously they don't want to. Nobody wants to be ruled by some barbarians from the north. The Vandals were from Germany, so definitely outsiders. But so um, you had that in Carthage. They came out, and that pretty much took out most of the Vandalic kingdom, which was most of Africa up into as we were talking about it. So he gets welcomed into Carthage as a hero, and they don't really have to put up a fight, and that's and right there he went into the kingdom, marched in. He ate Gelimer's lunch that was prepared for him and dealt with magisterial things, duties that he had to that the king would see and everything. And I know I'm sorry I say and everything so when you know too much, guys. I'm trying to get better with it, please. you know? But so he Belisarius at that point could have taken the crown, put it on his head, and called himself the new Vandalic king. And I don't think many people would have put up a fight. Just that he had all of Justinian's forces. But he didn't. He didn't. He went back to Constantinople with all of the loot they had gained and everything. Because so as the Vandals were pillaging and plundering from Germany, they hit Rome, plundered Rome, went and took everything down into Carthage. So when he took Carthage over, he did get the Bank of Carthage, and he got back so all of that lost Roman loot, which is rare. It's like, oh my god, he had like eagles from standards that were taken, like crazy thing. That's crazy. He reconquered and retook that. Like nobody talks about that. When you talk about the Eastern Roman Empire, nobody says like like you have to like dig and find out to learn that they retook most of the empire and they were the empire within themselves. The Byzantines. They were just as much Romans as the Romans. So it's like oh that doesn't get talked about at all. It's very little, but yeah, so Belisarius could have been a king at that moment. He take Gelimar as a prisoner. Oh, sorry. There was still a fight because Gelimar wasn't captured in that first fight. He retreated and they regrouped and brought some troops back and they had another fight right outside of Carthage. He like marched out to meet him then and it was like another bloodbath, similar to the first one. And I think in this one too, Calamar actually caught the Romans. The cavalry got there first, but Calamar didn't take the initiative, so then the rest of them arrived. They got into formation and wiped them out. And Gallimar was then captured at that point. So, not killed, captured, and sent back to Rome, where Belisarius receives a triumph. Which, like, so at this point, Justinian's, and so it's at this time you have, like, John of Cappadocia, who was a lieutenant of Belisarius, commanded his troops. He was a greedy motherfucker. And there's a story about how 500 men die on the way over because John of Cappadocia was so greedy, he would get his money to go buy food for the troops while he would buy cheap, rotten food and then pocket the difference. And 500 troops died from this, and he wasn't punished. But that's a rumor. But John of Cappadocia is one whispering into the ear, "Oh, Belisarius wants to be a king. He's gonna take everything." Blah 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 blah. And so that's Belisarius literally brings the other king in tow and hands it all to Justinian. Here you go, great emperor. And Belisarius gets a triumph. To Justinian's credit, it hadn't been done for 1,000 years, and certainly not a general. It was always the person like the emperor or whoever was leading would come back and throw his own triumph for himself with the Senate's approval. So, but at the end, and he was made consul, which at this time by this time the term consul it was literally an honorary title. It meant nothing because you had the emperor obviously, but But Justinian gave Belisarius that the triumph, and he did do that. They paraded Gelimar through the streets, and Gelimar is quoted as saying from the Old Testament, a quote from the Old Testament: "Vanity, oh vanity, everything is vanity, or all is vanity." Um, and then he's like executed or in prison or whatever. That's the end of him. That isn't the end of our guy Belisarius. Now, and this was only a 6 month campaign, so it's like hard to kind of talk about. But it was only 6 months. But that brings us into our next campaign, which this one takes a little bit longer. And this is the one that I really like. This is the next where he retakes the heartland of the city, Rome, the Italian campaign. So that's what we're gonna get into next, guys. All right, guys. So we're in 535, 544 just ended with the triumph for Belisarius. He retook all of Africa for the empire, and now we're doing the Italian campaign. He gives them the men, the ships, 400 men. This is where he had only 8,000 men. 8,000 men, 400 ships sent to Italy. He lands in Sicily, where he landed in his first campaign, actually. But then when he went off to Italy or Africa then, but he lands in Sicily with 8,000 men, and at first he meets like no resistance until up in the corner there's Paderna or something like that. Palermo. They were the only ones that resisted on the island of Sicily, and he takes them out obviously, and within a couple months he has all of Sicily under his control. This campaign isn't going to go as fast as the other one. This one lasts for 5 years, 535 to 540. So as we talked about, he's born in 500, 527 becomes the commander, then 528, 529 he gets the peace treaty, and 531 he goes to the Vandalic campaign. As we were recapping, yeah, 527 he becomes the general. 528 he's over there in the east fighting until about 531, where he goes and undertakes his. God damn it! Why can't I not get this right? Alright, so we're in 535, the Ostrogoth campaign. That's who these guys were called, the people that ran Italy at this time. They are the Ostrogoths. They came from Germany, and they were the ones that, when the Roman Empire fell, they're the ones that took it up, and then they became the Ostrogoth kingdom. So he lands in Italy, in Sicily, takes over the island, has Palermo that resists a little bit, but doesn't put up much of a fight. So after that, and it's like 536. That's when he gets the order to take the rest of Italy. So he pushes up, and it kind of goes. And this whole time, same thing, hearts and minds. We're not pillaging. We're not taking anything. And it goes to show how easy it was. Everyone pretty much capitulated. That who doesn't want to be a Roman, right? Even back then, they recognized its significance. So up until Naples, which we'll put a map up, he pushed the whole way up until Naples, and these were the ones that held out, which initially you had like half the population that wanted to throw it open, the gates open, and he like pleaded to him, "Hey guys, come on now, we're all Romans here," and but they didn't. He had to siege it, and the way they took it was there was an old, and this is kind of, it's like there was an old aqueduct and nobody was using. It's like, okay, there was and okay, so when you think about this, it was a big ass city. But they say the way they got past the siege was there was an old aqueduct that they were able to sneak in. And it's like, okay, but if there was a siege and people were on the walls, you'd think like they weren't like, well, look at that ramp thing that can just be used to get into the city. Like maybe we should not leave that open. But that's what they say happened. Look it up yourself. They said that an old aqueduct, they somehow got through. Some of his men were able to squeeze through the aqueduct and open the gate, and they stormed the gate and killed whoever put up a resistance. But like in this one too, Belisarius stopped the slaughter. A little bit of a slaughter started to go on. Belisarius put a stop to it, and that showed how much pressure he had over his men and could bring them back into the fold so very easily. But of that, the siege and takeover in Naples, which is that's right below Rome. So after he takes Naples, obviously you're looking at the road to Rome. So that's where we're going next. Is on to Rome. And then as he gets to Rome, the greatest thing ever that can happen can happen. And at this time, Rome is not like the jewel of that it once was of the whole entire world. It has been sacked, murdered, everybody pillaged. I think at its height there was 1 million people in Rome for 500,000. At this time, at most that there was 100,000. Some say even less than that. That's being liberal with the figure. So, city is not what it once was, but it still is Rome. They still have the historical want to bring it back into the empire, and he's there. He's going to take it. So they marched on to Rome, but they didn't even have to siege it. As they were as they were marching in the bottom gate, the Ostrogoths were leaving out of the top gate. They couldn't. And it's Rome where it was built. It was kind of on a hill, but it was like notoriously difficult to defend with not enough people. So yeah, and the Ostrogoths kind of realized that, and they retreated to Ravenna, which is a nice city within its own means. But so Belisarius was pretty much given Rome without a fight, luckily, and he didn't fuck around. As soon as he took over the city, he conscripted all males into the service, the city guard, and started rebuilding all the walls because they were all in disrepair and shitty. So he like immediately started um, repairing all of the walls, and he pretty much gets that. The king of the Ostrogoths, I'll put his name up. His name kind of escapes me now. But he kind of realizes, oh shit, it's only like 8 to 10,000 guys, and we have like 100,000. What are we doing? They kind of gathers all his forces, and then they march down onto Rome, and they siege the city. And Belisarius does not leave. They only have 8 to 10,000 people, but he puts up a siege, and it's ends up becoming a years long siege to then to win, and he does win. Ah, so we're in 537 AD. This is when the Ostrogoths marched down from Ravenna to retake Rome. They ask Belisarius to give up. He does not, and this leads to a six. It's like a 2 or 3 year siege. Yeah, or I'm sorry, it's a year. He has like a year and 9 days siege of Rome, and during this time, like they weren't run they didn't run out of food, luckily, because he had grains on, which I'll put up a picture or whatever that is. They said pontifical grains or whatever they were called. He had a way that the grains would, I think, like a water wheel. It was a water wheel to then crush the grain so then they could feed people. But when they were sieged, they also sent everybody out of the city, so then less mouths to feed. All of the men were conscripted into the city guard, and a lot of times during this whole year siege, people would be like, let's just go out and do one battle where we'll stake it all on everything and roll the die. And he gives another. But that's where Belisarius was a really good speech giver, too. So he would come out and he said, like, we are not sticking it all on one thing. We are not picking the easy route. We are not picking the quickest route, because the quickest route is not ever the easiest route. We are going to stay to the tried and true route that I know is going to win. And he shuts everybody out. And there was a priest that were in talks with the Vandals, and kind of discovers that and sends him on his way. Who knows if that was true? But Anastasia or Ambrosia, his wife, was like whispering in his ear while she was out fucking all the other guys. Oh man, but yeah. But he stuck to it. And then he uses Bucalari. He had them. They would do little sorties out to constantly harass the enemy and so that nobody got comfortable. So, and then after a year of this, they fled, and Belisarius won. Very great. And like we talked about in our last video, after a siege would carry on for like 6 months or longer, you would start getting disease, and it was nasty and everything. But Belisarius had taken Rome. We already had Spain and North Africa, and now we have up to Rome back in the empire. Like the empire is almost fully restored at this time. It's kind of insane. So after the siege was done and everything, and he was he took his time. Then that's when he kind of like kicked back. Then he started solidifying all his gains in Italy and Sicily, making sure that nobody could come from his back. There were holdouts along the ways there were different holdouts, and he would just bypass them to then go take Rome or the bigger cities. But so he took the next 3 years to kind of go back and take all those little garrisons over or starve them out or whatever had you. But that leads us to 537, where he takes the rest of Ravenna. And there, if you go and learn about this, we're kind of already an hour in the video, so. But there were, some betrayals and things. You had a eunuch that showed up and tried to take command, and it like went disastrous because he wasn't with the program and he had no idea what he was talking about. But it's like during all this time, Belisarius was gaining so much prestige in Rome. He was on the lips of everybody, and obviously that made a lot of people jealous. So Justinian sent a eunuch in Farses or whatever his name was to kind of like to cap, I don't know, to kind of make sure he doesn't get too out of control. And it's like, just let the man cook. But he couldn't, and it led to the deaths of thousands of people, unfortunately. Almost fucking blew the whole campaign. But Belisarius, the G, saved it like the G he is. But so if you want to look into this more, there are betrayals and things like that. But it wasn't really anything significant where gains were reversed or anything. But there was some betrayal and things, which we're going to talk about the betrayal overall. But there were some things going on within these campaigns that made them not the greatest thing in the world. But overall, he took Ravenna and then up into Italy. He took Milan is there now. I forget what it was called back then, but we'll put a map up. He pushes up into there, takes it all. And there is a point where he comes together and talks with the king, and they are willing to surrender Ravenna, I think it's Ravenna. They are willing to surrender and make him the king. If he will agree to be the king, they will surrender and give everything over to him. And at first, Belisarius agrees, and they open the gates and march in and everything. And then once all his army's inside the gate and everything, and he takes the crown, he like says like, "You're duped. Nope. I'm not the king. I am loyal to Justinian. I'm loyal to Justinian." And like, how different history could have been if he would have fucking grabbed it right there, right there. Mine, mine. I'm the one who took this. Me. I deserve it all, not some fucking. He sent the crown back, and what did he get for it? Nothing. Like, and it's like, so because of this, because he used that psychological warfare tactic that saved thousands of men's lives, that made Justinian jealous a little bit. He's like, "Oh man, oh man, oh man." Don't be like a Justinian. We are Belisarius. We are not Justinians. But he recalls Belisarius back almost in shame, like a little bit of shame going on. There's a lot of intrigue, and it's like he doesn't get a triumph like he did in the Vandalic Wars. Nope, nothing of the sorts. He gets reassigned to the east, back to the Persians, which they weren't even fighting then. And that's to like separate him from his base of power that he doesn't even have or doesn't even want. And it's like, the fuck, bro. It's very sad how Belisarius was loyal to the end, and he was really just betrayed, really. But that's the end. That's how it ended. He was offered the crown, and he denied it. Kind of like George Washington a little bit, but not really. But you know, but that's and that was almost the last of his fighting. He has like a last hurrah, which we're gonna get into. But that's this. That was the peak, and this is the towards the end. He gets recalled to Constantinople. No triumph or anything, and but all the lands stay under Justinian and everything. And that brings us to his betrayal. Eventually, the empire loses all of it until the fall in 1453, obviously, like I did in my last video, but that's like 1,000 years of history. We can't cover that right now. We're already like an hour into filming, so we're gonna wrap it up. So we're gonna wrap it up. The betrayal and end of Belisarius the Great. Okay. All right. So we're like in the 540s. Belisarius gets recalled to Constantinople, betrayed, assigned, no tribute, no triumph. He gets like demoted, reassigned, pretty much to like a lowly general, and he really just does that until he retires. And there were two people, like we talked about, Empress Theodora and John of Cappadocia, where when you end up, it's like, so people, they'll talk about, people will say about the people that undermine him, but no one will name them. Those are the two that that I'm naming. And then you had Narses too. You had so many people undermining this great man, Belisarius. These jealous losers that really could not do anything of this sort. They couldn't even dream to do anything so great. So what do? They whisper in the emperor's ear. Oh, he's not such a great guy. Oh, he's not. Sorry, my mic's over here. Oh, he's not such a great guy. Maybe we should get rid of him. And it works. And it's like, fuck you, Justinian. Fuck. No, I mean, hey, I think this stuff's awesome. I want to cover it. It's a little emotional, man. Imagine if you did that for the guy that, like, you were loyal to for 20 years, went and conquered the world for, and he's like, "Are you trying to take my spot, brother? Come on, man." And that leads us to, he retires, blah 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 blah. That leads us to 562, where he gets his last hurrah. So this is like the Bulgars in 562. Some pissed off people cross the Danube, that's frozen, and they siege the city. And Justinian has nobody to call on, nobody to help. And who does he call? Batman symbol goes up. Belisarius is recalled from retirement, and with 300 people, peasants and drunkards, which is this kind of like, really, did this happen too? But he sets brush fires, like he sneaks out of the city and sets brush fires and kicks up dust so that it looks like a giant army is coming over the hill, and the Bulgarians break the siege and run away. That's supposedly how this happened. Look it up yourself. Like I said, there's a couple things in this that it's like, did that really happen? But we're choosing to believe it happened. Whatever. What? Maybe. I mean, who knows? I wasn't there. None of you were either. So don't tell me what happened, because you don't know either. But we're going by what was said happened. So this is in 562. He has his last hurrah. Saves the city! Yay! Does he get anything for it? No. In fact, in 3 years, he gets implicated in a plot to assassinate Justinian. Which, no. So, when is this? Um, I'm sorry, 559 was whenever the Bulgars were taken. That's when all that happened, in 559. 562, 3 years after he saved the city, what thanks does he get? He gets implicated in a plot to kill the emperor. And it's like, can't you just leave the old man alone? But no, they can't. They bring him in front of the Justinian. They strip him of all his land and his wealth and his titles and his prestige. Strip it all from him, and they put him under house arrest. And he's like that for a couple years until Justinian sees that it was all stupid bullshit, and he reinstates him and gives him everything back. But then Belisarius dies like 3 months later, peacefully at home. W there, at least. At least our hero had a good end. Hopefully, like I said, I wasn't really there, so I don't know, but it says that he had a peaceful thing till he died. And then Justinian died a couple months after. But yeah, it's like, well, did all that stress from the before kill him when he was an old man? You did all that for your country and everything, for your emperor. And Theodora was the one that, like, implicated him in the thing. It's like, how jealous. Like, bitch. It's almost like I wish he would have. I wish he fucking would have took the crown from you assholes. Ooh, but he didn't, and he was betrayed. And there's a legend about Belisarius that he was taken and blinded and he died a beggar on the street. But that is just a legend. So they say maybe it is true, but that's a legend. They say that he died a beggar, blinded. But the real story says that he died at home peacefully. You know, then 562 or 565, I think, when he died. You can look it up. I'll put it up. But that's the story of Belisarius, the great Roman emperor. No, could have been an emperor, could have been a king, but he chose to stay loyal. Which, if it's to the right people that have your back, that's when it matters. And I think that's the most beautiful thing you can find is when you have people that are really loyal to each other and they really understand it. And there's only been like once or twice in my life where I've actually felt that. Tons of times where I've been loyal to people that didn't deserve it, and you know, that is what it is. But yep, that's the story of Belisarius, the last great Roman general. So I hope you enjoyed it. This one's a little bit of a longer one, but we got through her, and I hope you like the content. Hopefully the new mic setup's a little bit better. you know. And I think we're going to do one more video today about Greek fire, which is going to be a lot shorter. So if you watch that, I thank you. I appreciate it. Like, subscribe, maybe click the bell notification if that's what you want to do. But otherwise, hey, have a good one.